Hi there. Welcome to Thursdays at Home, a weekly live streamed hour of performances, readings, and more from IU students, faculty, and staff, brought to you by the IU Arts and Humanities Council. My name is Anna Groover, and I'm a council intern and your host this evening. Singing and dancing and creating and writing and making music are always important, but they're even more important right now when we're all physically distant from each other. So we're glad you can join us to celebrate these artistic practices in many forms. Tonight, you'll be hearing from poet and English professor Adrian Matejka, musicians Roberto and Paola Plano, architect and designer Kelly Wilson, and musician Ivan Masada. Let's get started. First up is poet Adrian Matejka. Adrian is the Ruth Lilly Professor of English at IU Bloomington and was the Poet Laureate for the state of Indiana from 2018 to 2019. He is the author of 3 collections of poetry: The Devil's Garden, which won the New York/New England Award; Mixology, a winner of the 2008 National Poetry Series, and a finalist for an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literature; and The Big Smoke, which was awarded the 2014 Anisfield Wolf Book Award, and was also a finalist for the 2013 National Book Award, 2014 Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and 2014 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Tonight, he'll be reading from his forthcoming book of poetry, Somebody Else Stole the World. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. It's good to see you again. Peace, everybody. I hope you're all staying safe and holding it together wherever you are. Many thanks to the Arts and Humanities Council for putting this together, and I can't wait to hear the work that my esteemed colleagues at IU are doing in their various fields. I'm going to read a few poems from my new book, Somebody Else Stole the World, or Sold the World, and it's forthcoming from Penguin Random House in 2022, assuming things stay the way they are. I thought it was going to be a book of love poems, but it turned out to be a book of love poems and a book about inequity and distancing. So all the poems have the same title, and I'll just read them without much explanation. Somebody else stole the world, and before I knew it, the violet sky was flagged with the preponderance of violet wants, for magnolias and natural light, any place without doors, for masks for pretending and for breathing as the antagonists with their small hands and stretched necks told the usual stories about wars and about freedoms while we buttoned up our confinement and dreamed about hugging. The antagonists got more frantic in their back talk while we missed our friends and dentist appointments. Molars fell out without new air. Hair changed colors without the music of living that used to sweep through it at intersections and at barbecues. Words lost their family recipes. Friends lost their words, then lost their friends. A few found love in the meandering grocery store lines and beautifully lined farmers' fields tilled with their own fruits. And the antagonists, they were all over the place, hunting for secrets, cell phones where their ears should have been. The air was so ripe around us, it might have broken in half if we touched it. Somebody else sold the world. I used to live in a house wrapped up in hungry flowers. They weren't as tall as Neruda's in his city next to the sea. Mine was a diminutive town, just like the flowers that lived in it, little magentas, roses, sing-song rehearsals of sing-along yellows and glorious whites when the right breeze kicked up. Out in our neighborly yard, the blossoms reached up to the falsettoed canopy each and every spring, aromatic layers of suburbs and hedge trim pollinating by dim windows while my little girl gospeled down the long stair of harmony. Glory be. It bent me like a stark song in the back talk, her harmony. Euphonium along the length of yawning houses, those for sale signs and claptrap windows. Everything sang its entropy. Everyone grew eventually, not by realization, but by revelation. Nostalgia made whole. What else could I do other than be melodious in the chorus? Sing some kind of shufflebuck as the people like me got infected disproportionately? I'm trying to normalize this litany of sunstruck sick days the same way Sisyphus did, pushing a bundled shipwreck all the way up to the fraught recycler for a few coins and a cigarette. Glory be my familial busted heart. Glory be my aberrant control over this big blue marble. Somebody else sold the world. Species of excuses in a short sale. I don't know, excuses. If I don't play along, excuses. If I can get what I want, excuses. Really, it's a good deal, excuses. If I didn't do it, someone else will, excuses. I'm committed to doing it now, excuses. Well, what had happened was after it was done, excuses. I'm about to catch this bus after it's done, excuses. Serious officer, it wasn't mine after all, excuses. Serious officer, oh no, not me, excuses. Let us go, you and I, excuses. Excuse me because I loved you so much. Excuse me because I drank too much. I was just playing a little too much, excuses. It was dark and he was dark, excuse me. I felt threatened by his dark excuses. I was worried about me, excuses. What about me, excuses? Somebody else sold the world. Another revolution breaking in half, another wired circumference snapped under the weight of its own lost expectations. Outside, the antagonists are wet with their flag colors and sycophancy, and I'm alone in the front room like it's 1987. The power is cut off from overdue bills, and I'm waiting for my mother to come home. The neighbors brawl like sullen countries over the demarcation of kitchen table and china hutch. Who gets what seems to be the only question they can look at each other long enough to ask. Where did their long stemmed love go? Even now, I'm sitting in the front window in this year of duplication and distancing as people goose step masklessly and the antagonists invent more ways to dislike Black people. Sitting, running, coughing, dreaming, cuffs for all of them. Bullets too, glinting in the impermanent circuitry of necessary workers. There's no getting out of seclusion for any of us as the antagonists head for their nervous boats and fantasy islands. Everything they need is essential while we stay in place like furniture. I'm just going to read two more. Somebody else sold the world while the rest of us cluster in the mall under the jewelry shop's sale lights, since it will be Valentine's Day again eventually. I'm jewelryless and anachronistic, still calling love by its 21st century name. I'm abiding by the great traditions with Byzantine breaths, while the people around me seem to double down on glint and keep it moving miraculously. I'm still looking upward, sure, prayer hands folded on top of the leather hymnal. Every one of my wrong choices chaptered and bound, but even I couldn't make mistakes with all these pendants for sale, winking like an imaginary lover's eyes. Future called it astronaut status in the glamour of the Atlanta skyline. Some astronauts' fillings have been made out of star parts. Some become their own wedding rings and gold records too, as perfunctory and hungry as gravity. And this is the last one. Thanks for staying with me. It's called Somebody Else Sold the World. Imagine that. When I was a kid, I watched Poltergeist on a Tuesday, and it scared me so much that I was afraid of the weekday itself. The long fingered trees outside of my head is still missing its bark. Antagonists everywhere, mostly maskless as unprepared burglars. They cough without covering their tracks. They leave their shoddy fingerprints everywhere. Instead of mixing yellow and yesterday for a new impossibility, they acquit their nondescript hearts over and over until the bag bursts and is resurrected inside the TV's particle white after all of the shows stop. It will be weeks before anyone cares enough to change their channel. In the spring snow of my imagination, the last antagonist and his empty stomach feels just like a Black man for a moment. Everyone crosses the street as soon as he gets near. His pockets are turned out while everyone pretends he sold the world. Thank you.
Thanks for that wonderful reading, Adrian. If you're just tuning in, this is Thursdays at Home. The IU Cinema is hosting another great event tonight in their virtual screening room. At 7 p.m., right after we finish this show, they'll host a conversation with Eliza Hittman, whose latest film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, premiered in the U.S. Dramatic Competition section at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival, where it received a special jury award. Check out the cinema's website or follow the link in the comments for more info. Our next guests are the husband and wife duo of Roberto Plano and Paola del Negro Plano. Both are faculty members in the Jacobs School of Music piano program and award-winning pianists who have performed in halls and on programs around the world. They will be performing two four-hand pieces for us this evening. The first is a piece from Robert Schumann's Pictures of the East and is featured on their most recent CD release, Schumann Complete Music for Piano Four Hands. The second is a piece by Turkish pianist and composer Fazil Say titled Winter Morning in Istanbul. Thanks for joining us, Roberto and Paola.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for having us. It's really great to be with you in such a difficult time. Again, I'm Roberto. This is my wife, Paola, and we're from Italy. We arrived in Bloomington 2 years ago because we joined Jacobs School of Music at Indiana University, and we're extremely happy we did it.
We're going to play for you two pieces. The first one is by Robert Schumann. The piece is part of a set of 6 pieces written by the German composer for his wife, the great pianist Clara Wieck Schumann, as a gift for her for Christmas 1848. The title of the whole set of pieces is Pictures from the East, Opus 66. We know that Schumann had been interested in Eastern poetry and spirituality for some time. And this specific title, Pictures from the East, explains the connection with a collection of poems written by a great Arab poet of the 11th century. So we're going to play for you Pictures from the East, Opus 66, number 4, by Robert Schumann.
So this was a piece written by Schumann in 1848. We'll now jump ahead almost 200 years, but we will keep the Eastern connection by playing a piece called Winter Morning in Istanbul, written by living Turkish pianist and composer Fazil Say. We actually played in Istanbul 4 months ago. We were there right before the pandemic started, and that has been our last trip together since then. So we're really grateful to have this opportunity, as it brings us back great memories from that time, not only because the trip was so recent, but also because of the magical atmosphere which will always stay in our hearts, that we were really lucky enough to experience in Istanbul. And exactly at the right time, as what the title says, Winter Morning in Istanbul. In fact, the composer himself describes the piece as inspired by imagining the Bosporus covered under a layer of snow during the winter months. The piece is in neo-romantic style. It's also mixed with Eastern scales and with contemporary dissonances. And the composer also requires the performers to use a particular technique that you will absolutely notice. At the beginning of the piece and also throughout the piece, we will be stopping the strings with our hands inside the piano. And this was required by the composer in order to try to reproduce the sound of the saz, which is a kind of Turkish lute that was used in Ottoman classical music, and it's still nowadays used in Turkish folk music. It was great being with you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Paola and Roberto. That was lovely. If you're just tuning in, this is Thursdays at Home. Welcome. Join us here on our Facebook page every Tuesday evening for Quarantine Conversations as Indiana University faculty members confront COVID-19 from a wide range of disciplinary perspectives in the arts and humanities. Our next quarantine conversation is Tuesday, May 19th at 8 p.m. and will cover the topic Humanism, Public Policy, and Medical Practice. Check out the link in the comments for more info. Our next guest is T. Kelly Wilson, the director of the J. Irwin Miller Architecture Program in the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design. His drawings and paintings are in the collections of Harvard University, the Boston Public Library, the Rhode Island School of Design, the Ralph Lauren Collection, and in many corporate and private holdings. Kelly's architectural drawings have been published widely, including the New York Times for the area of Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, and the Columbus Circle Redesign Project. Tonight, Kelly will be discussing his process for creating designs and sharing some of his drawings with us. Take it away, Kelly.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you very much, Anna, for the introduction. I'm happy to be able to show you some of my work. I'm going to share my screen. I prepared a bunch of images on PowerPoint. So here, I'm director of the J. Irwin Miller Architecture Program here in Columbus, Indiana, and I am also an associate professor here at IU. I'm an architect and an artist. I'm neither fish nor fowl, this twin bird. And I want to show you drawings that I make for architecture that were inspired by my understanding of art that inverted the process by which architecture is often invented. And I'll start here by showing you, these are architectural renderings done in projects that I've been involved with, some in New York City, some in South Korea, some in Boston, some here in Indianapolis in the upper right-hand corner that was designed for the IMA with Marlon Blackwell. IM Pay, Fred Coder, John Reed, architect. These are all, Machado Savetti, these are all firms that I had worked with in collaboration. These were all projects I was involved with in some level of design. And all of these images you see here, I made the drawings of by hand. They're called architectural renderings. Now, the rendering of a drawing, the depiction of it in reality, usually comes at the very end of the design process when a lot of decisions preceded the making of this particular drawing. So much has to go into the making of a building before its imagery or what it looks like and what kind of atmosphere it would create, what kind of feeling it would have would be generated. I'm going to show you a process that inverted that. It was a consequence of being a visual artist. I said I'm a visual artist. I draw in the urban realm. I find the crusty parts of a city. In this case, it's the Fort Point Channel of Boston, where an old rolling bridge was a fantastic subject to draw. Also in this part of the city where no one's going to bother you. I'm an avid draftsman. I keep my ideas that are discovered in reality in sketchbooks that I collect. And I'm recording not only analytical observations, but architecture, like in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. I also collect visual ideas. These are very important because they're distinctly different from the way in which we understand and collect analytical concepts, which are also necessary in design. I also am an urban painter. I will travel into the city, finding these streets and canyons and spaces in New York City, where I also have a studio, to paint a la prima. It says from observation out in the street, where these narrow canyons would have these tremendous collections of stuff at the bottom, the way you look at stuff at the bottom of your wastebasket or something. I also paint in a studio practice, and when I don't go outside or I focus on an interior construction like this, well, I'll combine organic and inorganic shapes in a construction. I'm still painting from observation. Now, it's important to say a few things about how architectural drawings are used in architecture, and I'd like to describe those before I describe the process. We use a set of drawings to explain our ideas in architecture, and one of the most powerful is called the plan. Now, that's looking down on a cut through the building or object in question to stare at it directly flat, and I poured ink into a styrofoam cup and cut it so that you could see the inside of the cup. And indeed, there's architecture that tends to utilize or be what we call plan bias. This is Luke Kahn's synagogue for Jerusalem, though never built. The form of the building is almost a direct extrusion of the shape that's in its plan. The section is the other type, and that's a vertical cut. It's the same idea of cutting through a plane, through an object, but flipping it to the vertical and looking at the space beyond. And some buildings are best explained in section. This is the state capitol of Nebraska. And the two little postage stamp-like plans on the left and the right of this tower hardly suffice to express the majesty of this particular Capitol building, which is expressed, if you could follow my cursor, to a vast hall with a great domed interior where the scale of a person is tiny to that space and give you an awesome sensation when you walked inside. So the section, it's really a building that's explained by section. And then the elevation, that's the outside view, like the section, but it's moved to the outside of the object. And the Paris Opera House by Charles Garnier is a great example of an elevation drawing. Here you see it rendered with different degrees of ink mixed with water to make it gray or dark to help depict some depth to this otherwise flat drawing. Like I said, these kinds of drawings and renderings are done at the posterior, the very end of a very long process where a lot of criteria is established for a building. That process is usually preceded by something people call sketching, where a fragmentary process of collecting shapes and partial design moves and partial solutions are strewn across a page, sort of like a Frankenstein of parts as you search the debris pile of bits and pieces that would help pull elements together until you get something starting to work that might result in a form like you see in the lower right-hand image. This is Oliver Alto's sketch pages for Villa Maria, his fantastic home, which is a hallmark of his design. My own process when I design like that is not untypical. You'll see in the upper left a home and studio I will design for my wife and myself somewhere in the countryside, and I'll draw in plan just using line weight and maybe draw a perspective sketch and then an axonometric, which is another form of three-dimensional drawing. On the right-hand side of the page are revisiting this, saying, I don't have that much money. I need to make something smaller. But all the time, I'm using several drawings at once to help build a total story. And not really quite sure what it looks like. These are very abstract drawings. What I learned from art and my insights that came from learning how to understand pictorial construction and where it came from emboldened me to think of another way to draw and imagine architecture. I'd first like to show you two examples of what I mean by that. Or I should explain, this is a museum by James Stirling, famous British architect, that shows this process. On the top left, you see a sketch done by his free hand with an ink pen on a napkin and bled into the napkin. That sketch is followed by a series of drawings, like in the middle, which are measured. They're done to architectural scale, and they answer a lot of the questions the sketch will raise. This tends to be followed by the model you see on the left. After that is done, you see the rendering on the far right, which tends to describe, it's projected from the plans and the sections, and an architect will render it or give it some color to try to explain what the experience might be like, because plans are essentially abstractions. Now, even in computer drawing, even though we'll model 3D, it tends to follow this procedure. The rendering, this depiction of an atmosphere, comes last in the process, where the contemplation of what things look like as we design them is slowly crept up on and almost, in some cases, prefigured before they're even before they're designed. So I'm going to show you work from Ingres. This is J.A.D. Ingres, the French artist from the 1820s who won the Rome Prize and lived in the Villa Medici, which is back here. And these are his drawings. He made 225 drawings in his time period as a student at the L'École d'Art. He won the Prix de Rome, was in Rome for 2 years, and he drew the topography of Rome. Now, my photograph on the right shows you that Ingres was taking great liberties with drawing and perception. The obelisk is nowhere near the same height as the towers on this church, nor is the staircase as tall as it is in reality. And as an architect, I know how to look at these buildings and know whether their stones had been changed or not, and they hadn't. He is advertising his home, the Villa Medici, where he's staying most likely. I looked at every single 225 drawings. I found where somewhere in the neighborhood of 30-some were still intact in terms of the view had not changed, and 6 allowed me to do a protracted analysis. And I would do this. I'd go find here Quattro Quadranati. I would take a piece of plexiglass, put it up in front of my face, take a black magic marker, and carefully trace the outline you see below in the slide, because I just wanted a direct projection of the real so that I could then compare it to his drawing and see how many liberties he took with the act of perception itself, though he drew from reality, to alter a composition for the purposes of making the pictorial structure of his paintings remarkable. And I'm going to point out one structural element. There are three basic issues in drawings when I teach it. One is called touch, which is the quality of touch or quality of the mark that betrays the human hand. Second is narrative, which is what is the story being told over a drawing. The third is structure, which involves various aspects of composition. One of them is the two-dimensional ordering systems in drawing. I'm going to point out that in his drawing with my cursor, you can find what we call a foursquare, where roof lines and ground lines are lined up perfectly to build a foursquare in the drawing to help the two-dimensional composition of the page. That's the Colosseum back here, which he's raised up to make the height of the door just to call that equation across, when in fact, it's far lower. Oh, in the courtyard of the same building, there's the plexiglass drawing on the left, and on the right is my montage photograph, the plexiglass drawing being much more advantageous. And I would then slide to compare my drawing to his, slide one over the other, and everything you see in red is where it ought to be. Everything you see in black is what he drew. So you can see how much liberty he took to manipulate and cheat or exaggerate the issues of perspective and seeing to accommodate issues about constructing a new form of pictorial space, as he's one of the early, I would say, proto-modernists for flattening space and building a new kind. Now, I'll use one more example to explain what I mean by learning to see various visual ideas in art. This is a watercolor. It's very small, by James Turner, the famous British landscape artist, who made this drawing in Lord Egremont's manor. Lord Egremont was like his second dad. At the death of his father, he took respite for 2 years inside the manor house of Petworth. In that house, he made over, several hundred drawings and watercolors depicting manor life. Of all of them, this one was one of the most remarkable. It's called the North Gallery at Night. And what's unusual about it, besides this shaft of light that comes in from one side and lands on our art spectators who are in the front of the picture, the lunette windows, which are blue in the background, are wonky. Something does not seem right. And for an artist of the caliber and talent of a Turner, who certainly knew how to line things up and make a straight line when he needed one, something is off. And we're led to have to think about this. Why would he have done such a confusing job with these droopy windows that look like Frank Gehry, the modern architect, had visited this building, not the neoclassical straight up piece of geometry it is? Well, it's kind of remarkable to discover that if you take all shapes in a drawing have what we call a centroidal axis. So if something's tilted, we look at the influence of that tilt through the rest of the page. And if we take that axis through each of the lunettes, 90 degrees to the sills, look what we find. The background sills and their window shapes are aligned to the figures below them, asking the background to come into complicity with the foreground. And indeed, if I were to straighten out this drawing in the rules of what makes an architect make a drawing, I would be forced to do that through the magic of Photoshop to strengthen the corner where it seems to belong. And my attention goes to the rear of the picture where exactly nothing is happening. Or if I do it the other angle that the windows seem to allude to where the corner might be, it does the same problem. It does not repair the drawing to its original design. He had been compressing the rear of his page into complicity with the stuff at the front of his page to build a pictorial space, to build a new form of energy. It's the advancing wall of modernism found in Turner's work. I teach this to my students through various means. One is using tape drawings. Take a long hallway, use the tape, and learn to build two-dimensional shapes that compress the hallway, and then see if you can't re-expand it again. That's one of my students a long time ago doing that. So in my own work, I thought I could take some of this knowledge to making a drawing to depict an imaginary place of architecture, not having to go through plans and sections and sketching process using program and aspirations and square footages and limitations imposed by sight to slowly creep up. And I can contemplate the imagery of a place using an artistic process that reaches for metaphor in a completely way. So I'm able to contemplate images without having to besot them with the, or freight them with the weight of problem solving just yet. So you see them numbered 1 through 4. I'm taking graphite and dragging it across the page, big piece of 9B, a pure graphite, comes out of the ground that way with a kneaded eraser, which I can drag through to make, remove drawings, remove the graphite. What this does, it gives me variety. And the only rule I'm following is make depth happen on the page and solve the problems of holding a page together so there's pictorial structure through the whole page, and allow association and sensation and feeling to allow imagery to build. So I would come up with something like this through that process, for which I would then propose a plan. Now you see these scale figures the size of people, these are ramps, there's some tree-like thing holding up some, oh, I've invented a museum. And I know how to draw that plan. I'll draw 3 great trunk-like legs that'll hold up this vaulted roof, and those ramps will be held by this strength of this dome. And well, that's as far as I needed to go for that particular exercise. The drawing at the top, I made that first, this conical thing, and tonal shifting, something curving, and people perhaps lurking or gathering. Of course, it's a trinity of opera house. This is a musical place where there'll be places for opera and places for just the piano, and it'll be set in water. You'll have to use a boat to get the. So you see my section drawings and plans and contemplations of the fragmentary pursuit of a design came after the making of the promulgations of the image. Now, let me show you a process. So I'll take that big piece of graphite, piece of paper, and I'll just put some tone on, and then slowly add more tone to deepen it, grab the eraser, drag it through, lift it out, and now I've got depth happening. I sense a curve, I'll sharpen it with the edge of my eraser, add more tone to make that even sharper. The bottom of the page and the left side are empty. They need to be answered. I'm gonna have to extend the drawing down to it. Looks like a reflection, but the eye is running off the page vertically. I need to arrest that with some kind of zigzag that would be a ramp that would bring me back into the picture. A foreground element, which is an arch, and a background element, which was a window. Balance this off. Now I need scale figures I put in the middle, and I deepen the touch of the tones in various places to pull the forms out. Now, that's how the process works, as I took slides of making a drawing. And I come up with things that have new ground planes and unusual vaults and access for light across forms that spill and give shards of experience. And just sometimes the last thing I'll do is put a little touch of graphite, and that tells me the scale of the figure on a great escalier, mounting into a fantastic hall, or bridges across unusual ground planes with light pouring through. And I'm going to point out the 4 square I borrowed from having studied on. Just, of all the many things we look at a drawing, it's really just one of them, and certainly not the meaning of a drawing. And great vaults and arches that span across floors that control and divide and sequence space together, allowing light to fall down in between them. I'll make larger sheets of almost glens of spaces, doubling those sheets, quadrupling or sextet. This is a 6-foot by 8-foot drawing. I am now making drawings of spaces without having the program loaded first and the abstract criteria for it. I'm making these images and they suggest what programs belong in them. Well, they're imaginary architecture. I'm not answering to a client. But I am doing something, as my wife, the artist Jennifer Riley, would point out, oh, I know exactly where you're getting those images. And I don't even know this myself. She says, those, from all those years in Rome, teaching Rome amongst those ruins, and the impact of the Indiana woods on you, which were new to us from the East Coast because all these hardwoods we cut down on the East Coast never came back. And when we came out to Indiana 9 years ago, Jennifer and I just marveled, absolutely marveled at the scale of these magnificent sycamores and these giant oaks that we don't have back east that blossom these great canopies of space. She could see that. I didn't know that till she mentioned it, but that's how, when reaching for imagery and metaphor begins to touch on your sensations and you're allowed to contemplate and think about the feelings and meanings inherent to image making as they may inform vernacular architecture. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your process, Kelly. That was super cool to see. If you're just tuning in, this is Thursdays at Home. The Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design and the Grunwald Gallery of Art are now presenting virtual exhibitions of work by graduating BFA and MFA students. You can find the exhibitions on the Eskenazi's website or by following the link in the comments. Our last performer is Ivan Masada, a classical guitarist and PhD candidate in the Jacobs School of Music. He began his musical studies at the National Institute of Fine Arts in Mexico City and graduated summa cum laude in guitar at the National School of Music of the National Autonomous University of Mexico. Since then, he has premiered works by a number of esteemed composers, performed with orchestras and in several prestigious guitar groups, and performed for audiences around the continent. Tonight, he'll be sharing 4 pieces for us on classical guitar. Welcome, Ivan.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Arts and Humanities Council for the invitation. And I want to make a correction. I'm not a PhD candidate. I'm still completing my coursework, but I'm working towards a degree, of course. As you mentioned, I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I joined the community of IU in 2011 to pursue a master's degree. And I'm currently working with the Latin American Music Center as an assistant coordinator of the mariachi of IU. So I am very involved in promoting Mexican culture. And I decided to play for you a set of 3 Mexican traditional songs arranged for solo guitar by the Mexican composer Manuel Ponce, who took themes from the Mexican Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century. He chose 2 songs and he added one that he wrote. The first one is called La Pajarera, which means the bird seller. The second one is a love song called Por ti mi corazón, which means for you my darling or for you my love. And the third one is a proper name, so it has no translation, it's the Valentina. These songs were performed back then for regular musicians. They were not trained musicians, so they were songs that everybody knew, and they would just accompany themselves with a guitar and something like that. And later on, some groups took those songs and they recorded them professionally. People such as Jorge Negrete in the mid-20th century recorded some of these songs. Manuel Ponce dedicated the songs to Andres Segovia, who was with no doubt the most important figure of the classical guitar in the 20th century. The last piece that I'm going to play for you, it's one of the most played pieces ever written for the classical guitar. In 1952, the French movie Les Jeux Interdits was released, and the director of the movie asked Narciso Yepes to participate for the soundtrack. And he chose a 19th century piece that until now nobody knows who wrote. And over time it was known as the Spanish Romance. It is a very simple song, but by no means it's an easy piece, although most classical guitar beginners play at one point. It's a beautiful piece, and I think it's something worth playing, although some very advanced guitarists kind of forget as part of their repertoire. So, Spanish Romance. Thank you.
Thanks for that beautiful performance, Ivan. And thank you to all of our guests who joined us this week for Thursdays at Home. We're grateful for your time and devotion to your craft and your generosity in sharing it with our community. If you've missed any of our previous Thursdays at Home or quarantine conversations, you can find those videos on our website or on the IU Bloomington YouTube channel. We'll be back next week with another Thursdays at Home, 6 p.m. on our Facebook page. Keep an eye on our social media channels where we'll be announcing next week's performers soon. Thanks for joining us and have a great evening.